We continue with the sixth chapter of the book of Ezra. We were left off yesterday with a big cliffhanger, as they say. The Jews have started to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash after a 20-year delay, 20 years because the original permission given by Cyrus in the year about 539, 538 had been prohibited because the Samaritans locally said that they were troublemakers, which it seemed in the past the Jews were. And the Jews, 20 years later, due to the prophets, come and they just start to build the temple without permission. And then the Persian governors and whatnot, they say, you're not allowed to do this. They go and they send a letter to Darius the king, and Darius looks through his records. And here is where we continue. Be Dayin Daryavish Malka Sham Te'em Uvakaru Bebeit Sifraya di Gnazaya Mitchamin Tama Babel. So Darius, the order, right? He made a king and he searched through the archives to see whether or not the Jews had been granted permission to rebuild the temple. Is that really true? And what happened? And that's the question he is looking into at this point in time. Vihishtakach ba'achmora Bebrita di b'madai medinata megila chada v'chein ksiv begava dichrona. And right, he looked into the fortress and to see if this was the truth or not, and if they were given permission. And he found a scroll which said as follows. And let's go to verse 3. And I'm just going to read it in English. In the first year of King Cyrus issued an order concerning the house of God in Jerusalem. Let the house be rebuilt, a place for offering sacrifices with a base built up high. Let it be 60 cubits high and 60 cubits wide. Ezra doesn't give us the details when he discusses this in the opening chapter, but here we get into more of the details, how much they're allowed to build. And in verse 4, with a course of unused timber for each 3 courses of hewn stone, the expenses shall be paid by the palace, and the gold and the silver vessels of the house of Nebuchadnezzar that had been taken away from the temple in Jerusalem, transferred to Babylon, shall be returned, and let each man go back to the temple in Jerusalem where it belongs. You shall deposit it in the house of God. And so that was what was found by Daryavesh, by Darius. And then he turns and he does his own, he follows up with it, and he says, to Tatnai, Ka'an Tatnai Pachatavar Nahara. We have this word pachat, sort of the pasha. We had the same word used in the book of Chagai to describe Zerubbabel. Shetar boznai ve'uchenavatan afarsachya di ba'avar nahara rechiken havu mintama. So now Tatnai, the governor of the province beyond the river, and Chatar Mazai, and the colleagues, the officials of the province beyond the river, stay away. Shivuku la'avida beit Elohaidach. Allow the work. Remain away from it. Allow it to continue. Pachat Yudai l'shaveh Yudai beit Elohaidach yivnun al atre. Let the governors of the Jews and the elders of the Jews rebuild the house of God on its site. If it was only so easy today. Umini sim te'em lamadi ta'avdunim saveh Yehudai lach lemivna beit Elohad dech umin nechsei malka di midat avar nahara asparna nefkata ta'avta misyafta l'guvray lach di lo levatala. And I hereby issue an order concerning what you must do to help the elders. So not just leave them alone, but you have to help them in the building of the house of God. The expenses are to be paid to these men, right? Give them resources from the treasury, from the taxes that you will collect, so the work will not be stopped. And he continues in verse 9, they're to be given without delay, without fail. Don't make it, a case where then we have to issue an order telling you have to release the funds. Not that that ever happens. Whatever they need, the young bulls, the rams, the lambs, for the burnt offerings, and wheat and salt and wine and oil, and the order of the priest. So not just for the building of the items, but also for the actual sacrifices. So they may be pleasing sacrifices to the God of heaven, and pray for the life of the king and his sons. So, right, what do we see here? Which is an amazing thing. We're talking about a king of a polytheistic society, and I'm sure he said this to other societies as well, but he wants to sacrifice. He sees that this is a god, one of presumably many gods that he would have believed in, and it's going to be beneficial to him. Umini, and finally, verse 11, Umini sim te'em dikol enoshti hashna pitgama denayit nasacha amin betu zikiv ta'amacha lohai uveti nivalu yitaved al dina. And I also issue an order to whoever alters this decree shall have a bead removed from his house, and he shall be impaled on it, and his house confiscated. So, right, anybody who messes with it, tit for tat. You want to deal. You want to deal with the building of this house and destroy the building. Your building will be destroyed, and then right, you will be impaled on it. Veloha di shachin shmei tama yimagar kol melech v'am di yishalach yedei l'shnai lechabala beit aloydach div Yerushalem anadarav se Samet ta'am asparna yitava. Then he concludes, I thought it was the last verse, but he concludes his letter asking that the God who established his name there cause the downfall of any king or nation that undertakes to alter or damage the house of God in Jerusalem. I, Darius, have issued this decree. Let it be carried out without delay. Let's do it right now. And so Darius here, he comes and he makes this statement so that it will happen that the Jews will have the ability to rebuild their temple. Which Darius this is? Presumably it's Darius the First, Hystaspes, I don't know how to pronounce it exactly, I looked it up, who ruled the Persian Empire from 522 to 486, right? It was around the 6th year of his reign, would be around the year 515. We talk about being perhaps 516, so it's exactly 70 years from the time of the destruction, but 70 years, 71 years is pretty good. There's archaeological and historical sources that sort of say it's around then, and it also aligns with the 20 years or so earlier that Cyrus had initially given permission until this happened later. And there were obviously multiple Dariuses. Probably the most famous Darius was the Persian king who was defeated by Alexander, but that is well after this time. So let's continue. That's sort of the first half of the chapter. And now the decree has come from the king. And now we're told that Tatnai, we're in verse 13, the governor of the province, and Sheth-Bazanai and their colleagues, they carried out what King Darius had written. And the elders of Jerusalem in verse 14, they progressed in the building and they urged on by the prophesying of Haggai and Zechariah ben Iddo, and they brought the building to completion under the aegis of the God of Israel and by the orders of Cyrus and Darius and King Artaxerxes. So here it makes it sound like maybe it's somebody later, maybe they're giving permission later, but it seems to be completed during the time, as we'll see in a second, of the reign of Darius. And here we see the time. V'shei in verse 15, Beita dena ad yom tlatei lirach adar dihu shnat shet lamalchut Daryavesh malchut. The house was finished on the 3rd of the month of Adar in the 6th year of the reign of King Darius. You would think that the 3rd day of the month of Adar would be a greater holiday because of the Beit HaMikdash. Second Beit HaMikdash was built, but we don't see that. But it's okay in the 3rd month, in the month of Adar, the 3rd of the month of Adar. Excuse me, Adar is the 11th month of the year. Va'avdu v'nei Yisrael kahanyu leviu shar b'nei galuta chanukat Beit Elohad di dina bechedva. And the Israelites and the priests and the Levites, what did they do? They made a chanukat habayit. They made a dedication of the Beit HaMikdash, right? We call the holiday that we know from the Second Temple period Chanukah, because it's a rededication of the Beit HaMikdash after the Beit HaMikdash was defiled by the Greeks. So here we see the original Chanukat Habayit of the Second Temple, not the original Chanukat Habayit. We had one in the Mishkan. We had one at Shlomo. Let's continue. Verse 17, Pasuk Yud Zayin. V'akrivlu chanukat beit Elohad dena torin me'ah dichrin ma'atayin imrin arba me'ot tzfirah izin l'chata al kol Yisrael trei asar l'minyan shiftei Yisrael. What happens? They offer sacrifices, 100 bulls, 200 rams, 400 lambs, 12 goats as purification offerings to the according to the number of the houses or the tribes of Israel. Lakimu kahanya befluktahun ulavia b'mach lekatahon alavidat Elohai div Yerushalayim chatav sefer Moshe. And they appointed the priests and their courses and the Levites in the right, dividing them into different groups to serve in the temple, just as was described in the Torah of Moshe, the book of Moses. Vayasu b'nei hagolah pasach barbasar lachodesh harishon. And the b'nei hagolah here, usually we think b'nei, the golah means that the exiled, but presumably here it means the people who came in from the exile, the returnees from the exile. They were born there, but they are no longer from there. And so they bring the Karban Pesach on the 14th day of the first month, what we today call Nisan. Kitaru hakohanim v'lamim kechad kulam torim v'yashchatu hapesach chol b'nei hagolah achem hakohanim v'lahem. Right, they had from the 3rd of Adar about 41 days, a month, and 11 days. And they were able to do it because the priests and the Levites had purified themselves, and they were all pure. And so they were able to bring the Passover sacrifices for all the returned exiles. And right, everybody was able to have Vayochlu b'nei Yisrael in verse 21, pasuk chaf aleph, hashavim me'agola v'chol hanibdal mitumat koya aretz aleim lidrosh l'Adonai Elokei Yisrael. The children of Israel had returned from the exile together with all those who joined them in separating themselves from the unclean nations of the lands to worship the God of Israel. Vayasu chag matzot shivat yamim b'simcha ki simcham Adonai. They saved Leiv Melech Ashur Aleim Lechazek Kedem Melechet Beit Elohim Lo Yisrael, and they joyfully celebrated the feast of the matzah, of the unleavened bread, for 7 days, because God gave them joy by having the Assyrian king support them in their work and in their service of the Beit HaMikdash. Why here it exactly says Assyrian is unclear. Perhaps it says Assyrian because the Assyrians were the ones who brought in the aforementioned Samaritans, who caused so much trouble. It's a hard word to understand. There are all sorts of different gyrations that are attempted to make to understand it. The Babylonians defeated the Assyrians, and then the Persians defeated the Assyrians, the Babylonians. So it all goes back to Assyria. They're not great answers to that question, but what at its core in this chapter, if we look just a few things, it's 22 verses, 22 letters in the alphabet, represents the idea of completeness. We know that this when this takes place, like I said, it seems to be around the year 515 and 516. And the chapter is, we see it's not surprising where it ends. Right, there's a real renewal of national life, a completeness of national life due to the idea of the 22, like the letters of the alphabet, and we go back to a time of Pesach. We start with God at the time of Pesach, and we have a new start, a restart. If we remember back, it doesn't occur the way Haggai offers the prophecy, but around this time, as Haggai is charging, challenging, inspiring the Jewish people to rebuild the temple, they make all those excuses. Oh, we don't have enough money, all the excuses that they've made. And in the end of his last prophecy of his book is to say to Zerubbabel, I am God, I can destroy empires, I can make who's on top on the bottom. You're only a pasha, you're only a local clan leader or the like, maybe a little more than that, but I have the ability to make you a great king. That never happens. Zerubbabel, even though he's the son of King David, never becomes the great king. The second temple never truly lives up to the hype and the hope that we thought it would. But at this point, what we see is a great renewal, starting with Pesach, a lot of great hope. And not that it's a terrible disappointment. Sometimes in life you don't reach the heights that you expect. But this is a great moment in Jewish history, the third day of the month of Adar, and just some 40 days later, when these Jews who had been exiled, and the questions that were asked, will Judaism survive? We have been destroyed. Our temple was destroyed. The Babylonians destroyed everything, forgetting even the 10 tribes who had been taken away beforehand. Will we ever return? This is an inspirational and an important chapter. And it's one of the things we think about the return to Israel in our day. But it is events such as this that allowed that continually for the Jews throughout our time period, throughout the difficulties, throughout all of the exiles and the pains of the exiles, to see that we have returned in the past. We did do a new start, and therefore we did it again. And we should, unlike the second temple period, which I say didn't live up to the hope and the expectations that Haggai had for it, we hope that our return to our homeland, to Israel, will one day, maybe soon, live up to all of the hopes and the expectations that many of the other prophets have written about in their books.